Bonjour tout le monde. Today we've got two last pronouns to go over. These are the pronouns I and on. So today we'll talk about what is the pronoun I and how do you use it. Notice when I'm saying I, I'm referring to this one word, the letter Y. You're familiar with this from expressions like il y a or for there is already. What is the pronoun en and how do you use it? And what do you do when there are multiple pronouns in the same sentence? Not just for I and en, but for any of the direct or indirect object pronouns we've been studying so far. So let's start with verbs with the indirect object pronoun I. I is great, it's very elegant, it's a fun trick to use because it replaces not only the object that an object pronoun would replace, but also the preposition a, except for when we're talking about people. I'll explain what I mean. So verbs that take I refer to the question à quoi? So to what or in what. Here we have je fais confiance à la justice. Faire confiance à quoi? What are we showing confidence in? La justice, right? So this is going to be our phrase that we're going to take a look at replacing with I. Really, honestly, your big tip-off is that you have the preposition a right here before an object. Like I said, though, it doesn't apply to people. So you might remember that indirect object pronouns can also come up with the question à qui, and that's not an invalid question here. It's just one where we would still use the same indirect object pronouns. So je téléphone à mon ami, téléphone à qui, à mon ami. We're not going to replace that one with I because it's a person, not an object. So voilà, we can simplify this sentence, right? If you've already been talking about it and you want to say I'm confident in it instead of I'm confident in justice, you would cross off à la justice, and then we'd add I before our verb, right? Instead of je I, we know French, we're going to want to run things together, so it becomes j'y fais confiance, means I have confidence in it. Like I said, though, this does not apply to people, so we're going to follow the same rule here as we would before, where instead of je téléphone à mon ami, if we want to say like I call him or I call her, it becomes je lui téléphone. So we've got some examples here. For these 5 sentences, I want you to think about how could you simplify them using an indirect object pronoun. Keeping in mind that if we're talking about an object preceded by the preposition a, we can use this pronoun I, but if we have a person, we're going to want to stick to our regular indirect object pronouns. So go ahead and take a look at these. Pause. And now when you're ready, we'll go over some of the answers. So we have il obéit à les règles. We can replace that with il y obéit, right? We take à and everything that follows for the object to the rules. And replace it with I. So instead of il obéit à les règles, he obeys the rules, he obeys them, right? Just with that one little letter, right? This is what I mean by your sentences can become a little bit cleaner this way. Again, as long as you've already established what you're talking about. You do not want to start a conversation or a paragraph with this because people don't have the context. But if you've already established that you're talking about les règles, you can definitely do this to simplify a little bit. All right. Number 2, we have a person, so we are going to stick with je lui parle instead of j'y parle, right? Because you're not talking about something, you're talking to someone, so je lui parle. Mon papa y habite. Nous y avons pensé. Et il s'y fie. Voilà. Here are some common French verbs that end up using the pronoun I. I'll bet you can tell right away what the common factor is. It's that preposition à, like I talked about. That's really your biggest clue for when to use the pronoun I. Right? If you are switching a sentence around and you're left over with this a at the end, it's probably a case where this is the better pronoun to use. So I would take a look through these. If there are any that you don't know, look them up. But again, key thing is that preposition a here at the end is your biggest clue to go ahead and use the pronoun I. The pronoun en, kind of similar, but instead of objects that are preceded by a, these are objects preceded by de. Again, though, it's an object, not people. If it's people, we're going to use the indirect object pronouns you already know and love. So, for example, we have de quoi. This is one of the questions that will be answered by an indirect object pronoun, right? Or de qui, right? Voilà. être fier de qui. In both cases, right, we have an object preceded by de. J'ai peur des fantômes. Mes parents sont fiers de leur travail. This is not necessarily a person. I change it to an object to show en a little bit better, right? Just like with I, we can replace both the word before and the object, and in some cases, any modifying words there. So instead of j'ai peur des fantômes, you've already been talking or writing about les fantômes, and you want to simplify. Instead of saying I'm scared of ghosts, you can just say I'm scared of them. You can cross that out and add en. So it becomes j'en ai peur. J'en ai peur. Similarly, if you've already been talking about their work, right, you can get rid of de leur travail. Mes parents en sont fiers. Voilà. So we've got some practice here. We have je profite de la vie. How can we replace that? Tu as envie de manger. Je suis sûre de ma réponse. Ils ont peur de Raphaël. Et elle prend soin des enfants. Remembering that when we have an object, or in some cases an infinitive, we can replace de and what follows with the pronoun en. If we have de and then a person, we're going to stick with our usual indirect object pronouns. So go ahead and pause and give yourself some time to guess on these. In some ways, this is a nice object pronoun because 3 of your answers are going to look the exact same. All right, if you've paused, now let's go over it. So je profite de la vie becomes j'en profite. Tu as envie de manger becomes tu en as envie. Je suis sûre de ma réponse becomes j'en suis sûre. Right? Ils ont peur de Raphaël. This one, because it's a person, right, we're going to stick with lui. Kind of similarly, because the next one is also a person, des enfants, we're going to stick with our regular indirect object pronouns. Here are some common French verbs that often take the pronoun en. Again, you're going to notice probably right away a really common factor between all of these, and that is ending with de. So there are many expressions in French that end with de, right? We learned a lot of them even back in French 1 with our avoir expressions. So take some time to look over these, write down any that you don't already know, and then we can talk about what is the order of pronouns in the same sentence. So up here you have a chart. This shows you kind of the order throughout the sentence. You have first these pronouns me, te, ce, and then nous, vous, le, la, les, lui, leur, I, on. So this is the order that you follow if you have more than one in a sentence. Let's take a look at what I mean. Have multiple pronouns, you're going to use this order. So if I'm saying he told me it, it's more like he, me, it told. Il me l'a dit, right? I find me. My next pronoun is le. Me comes before le in this order. Right? For example, tu la lui donnes. Je me les y envoie. What I have found helpful in the past with trying to memorize these is I would make just one sentence for myself. That would be kind of my template sentence, and I would memorize it. I would find one sentence that I could remember pretty easily that would have one of each of these or many of these at least, if not all of them, and then I would have that as my template to remember which pronouns go where. A couple of additional reminders. Your pronouns are always going to go after the subject but before the verb. For example, je la connais, and in negative sentences, it'll go after ne. So, je ne la connais pas. Those rules still apply even if you have multiple. Right? In questions that use inversion, you're going to go before the verb. So, la connais-tu, ne la connais-tu pas. Et ça, c'est tout. Go ahead and add to your notes whatever you need from this. And happy writing. This is something that can be a little bit difficult to adjust to at first, but really is a great way to level up your French writing.